So let me give you what I call the 10 realities of executive life. You own your career, not the company. If you were to say, Keith, what was the biggest mistake you made early in your career, and what mistake do you still see people making today? It's that one. You leave it up to other people to manage your career. Let me tell you right now, you are the owner, the author, and the architect of your career. You do not want to be the backseat driver of your career. And we really get tricked into it if you think about it. So in kindergarten as kids, when you learn your alphabet and you count to 100, they give you a gold star based on performance. Later in grade school, it's honor roll and merit roll based on performance. You go to, high school, graduate, valedictorian, performance. College, summa cum laude, magna cum laude. When I came out with a 2.75, my grandmother said, Lordy, Lordy. But the fact of the matter is, it's performance. And then you get into the real world, and it's not that performance doesn't count, but it takes more than that. But we'll talk about that. So you own your career, not the company. I said this one earlier, nobody reaches the top by themselves. So that means it's important to develop relationships. It's important to know people. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And not just on the golf course. Understanding organizational culture is critical. This is huge. Every company, every organization has its own culture. And you've got to understand what it is before you go there. You want to try and understand if it fits in. So are you working for a company that's a meritocracy that promotes on merit, or seniority-based company? Are you joining a company where there's a clique here that runs everything, and if you ain't in that clique or looks like that clique, you got to know that. Every company has a culture. You got to understand it. It's not enough to be smart, hardworking, and a good performer. I said this earlier, and I'll say it again. Results trump effort every time. The toughest conversations I ever have to have are folks who want to talk about their effort when they miss the results. Now, again, you got to get the results the right way. You can't break a lot of glass like I used to. But again, it's the results at the end of the day. Number 6. Ooh, this is a tough one. You're part of a team, not a family. Unless it's a family-owned business and you're in the family. You're part of a team. And I struggle, before I do these types of meetings, I meet with the leadership of companies, and every now and then when I push back, well, we're a family here. And I said, let me give you a story. Any NFL fans in here? Okay. There was a guy who came out of nowhere and went to a small town in Indianapolis and took a team that was horrible, put it on his back, and built the Indianapolis Colts into a monster house team. His name was Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning was in 6 years of a contract, and he had a $28 million clause in his contract that said if he's on payroll by this date, we got to cut this guy a check. He had just had a neck surgery, and it was iffy if he was going to come back. And people were saying, oh, he's part of the Indianapolis Colts family. They're going to sign Peyton Manning. He built Lucas Oil Field. He did this. I said, let's take bets. I said, I bet you that when that day comes and goes, he's going to find out he's not part of the family. 2 days later, he was wearing a Denver Bronco helmet, because it's about the value that you bring. And in their mind, the value that was left in Peyton wasn't $28 million to pay. You are in this organization, you're on this team as long as you add value to Dr. Pepper Snapple. The minute you stop adding value, understand that you become at risk. You can have a family-like atmosphere, but I got this crazy cousin Ray Ray. I got to invite him to the weddings, but he's family. I can't get rid of him. They can get rid of you here. This is another big one. You must stay current to remain relevant. One of the things I see a lot of people fall back on is they get the degree, they do whatever, and they rest on their laurels. You got to stay current to remain relevant. The example I like to give is one that was mind-blowing to people, is that I became president and CEO of a $2.5 billion grocery chain in 2010 with no grocery experience whatsoever. And so the headhunter calls me, I go through the process, I must interview with everybody. I finally get to the chairman of the board, one-on-one, face-to-face. So, that weekend I'm reading supermarket news and I'm understanding the grocery business and I'm walking in the stores because I'm ready. The man asked me 2 questions. He said, Keith, the first question is, where do you get your information from on a daily basis? He said, funny you ask. I said, I read the Wall Street Journal online, typically before 9. By noon, I'll read an industry publication of whatever industry I work in. I said, and just to stay on current events, I read the USA Today probably later in the day. He said, good answer. He says, now, what's the last good business book you've read? I said, wow, I just finished reading this book called Blue Ocean Strategy by Renee Montague, and it talks about blue oceans. He said, the formal part of this interview is over. He said, I needed to know that you were a continuous learner and that you had intellectual curiosity. He said, the people before you who I asked that question to in this process didn't have answers. And so I'm going to put you on the spot, so to speak. Don't raise your hand. But if someone were to ask you, where do you get your information from on a daily basis to stay current for your job, for your career, what would you say? What others think of you does matter. Feedback is a gift. I knew they told us growing up, sticks and stones may break my bones. In the real world and in the business world, what people think of you matters. And feedback is a gift. And I learned the hard way that there's 3 things you do with feedback. If it's good feedback, embrace it and do more of it. If it's feedback that's negative, but you agree that it's negative and you need to work on it, put a plan to work on it. Those are the easy 2. What do you do when you get the feedback that isn't true, you know in your heart is not true, but it's out there? That's the tough one. And we all struggle with it. I've gotten it a few times in my career. I'll tell you 2 funny stories real quick. One, I was at Pitney Bowes, and I got that same call from that same VP, and Dina, you know who I'm talking about, and she says, Keith, I get a complaint that when you go around the country, because I had responsibility for the country at this point, you do these town hall meetings, and word is you only talk to the black people. And so my initial reaction was, hell, there ain't but 3 black people everywhere I go, so But I said, I got to figure out what to do with that, because if that's the perception, I got to fix it. And so I went home, back when I used to drink, and said, why is that perception out there? And I realized, here's what happens. When I go to a city, they're so proud of me, the African Americans, and so they rush to me to meet me. And when I sit down at lunch or breakfast, they run to my table And so it gives a perception. And so I said, okay, I can fix that. So what I started to do was whenever I would go to a town, the first thing I would do was something called Coffee with Keith before the meeting so people could come and hobnob. I then made sure that at lunch or breakfast that I would not sit at one table. I would go around to every table. Now, I gained 15 pounds in a year, but I had to kill that noise, the perception. So what others think of you does matter. And oh, by the way, as a senior leader, it matters. So again, we'll talk more, but it matters. The higher you rise, the harder it gets. You may think it's easy, but it's really not. You just have different problems. You got people problems. How many people think managing people is easy? It's hard enough to manage yourself. And then, oh man, you don't want to talk about that. And then you can't fake it till you make it. I know it sounds cute, but at some point in the business world, they will figure you out as a fraud and a phony, so you can't do it.